Jerry, thanks for that long introduction. No. Okay, what our panel is going to talk about this afternoon are transportation fuels, which are clearly, I'm sure as you understand, a significant contributor to greenhouse gases. And so some of this will be a little depressing, at least my first few slides are, just discussing the problem, but then maybe we'll end it up with a little more optimism, okay? Maybe. We'll see how that goes. All right, so why do we use liquid transportation fuels? There's really two reasons. One of them because they're very high, they're liquid, so they're easy to transport, and they're very high energy density. So wonderful things to drive around on. Not to say anything discouraging about batteries, but that's lithium batteries on the far left compared to diesel fuel on the far right. So just in terms of utility, they're fantastic. And then what's on the right-hand side of that graph are the cost of petroleum from 1946 till 2008. And so really by, sort of industrial revolution historical times, they've been just amazingly cheap fuel. I mean, before 1970s, they were averaging about $8 a barrel, right? We had the little bump up in the 80s, when OPEC started causing trouble. And then that came back down to $25 a barrel and stayed there for many years, and we got very comfortable with it really until 2007 when the first big spike shot up, almost to $150 a barrel. It dropped down after that, and this graph was in 2008, but as many of you know, that came right back up again, and it sort of averaged about $100 a barrel. And $100 a barrel makes a big difference. That is no longer particularly cheap fuel. Okay? The second thing is that we have this enormous infrastructure that's been built over the last 100 years. From the exploration of that to the pipelines and tankers to get it around, to the refineries, to the gas stations, all the way down to the cars that we drive, right, which have a half-life, I'm sure Mark will tell us, of something around 20 years. So what that means is that $12.2 trillion in infrastructure is also not going to be turned over anytime soon. So these fuels are here to stay for a while, at least, even as we look for alternatives. Now, many of you have probably heard that in this country we've slowed down, at least, in fact, decreased our use of petroleum over the last few years. But worldwide, that has not happened. In fact, the projections for energy consumption on the planet are that it's going to increase another 40% in the next 7 or 8 years. And, there's a variety of reasons for that, but this one is probably the easiest to describe it. This is actually a picture of a freeway in Beijing, China from 2009 when I was there. And the amazing thing about it is when I was there 10 years ago, there were an enormous number of bicycles and motorcycles everywhere. And in 2009, when I headed back again, that's the scene you see. So clogged freeways, and the amazing thing is they're all brand new cars, right? And in fact, for reasons that I don't understand at all, there's this really ugly SUV that everyone over there loves. It's the one Tiger Woods advertises, which in this country I don't think has ever sold any, but every fifth car over there is one of them, right? And then there's the graph on the bottom just shows you that number of automobiles. So we've had about steady state in this country about 100 million. We sort of replaced that at about 15 to 16 million cars a year. In China last year, they added about 19 million new cars, right? On their way up to the rest of the world, up to about 600 million cars now, and that's going to increase, okay? So I'm sure many of you have also, seen in the news, and it always amazes me to read this, that, we're going to hit energy independence in this country in the next few years. The reason for that is shown on that graph on the right, and that is the top red line is our consumption, and the bottom blue line is our production. And the little squiggly lines are actually our consumption and production. The little arrows were added in. And so many people have projected out from that, based upon the last 3 to 4 years of the way consumption has gone down and production has gone up by as little as 2018, 5 years from now, we could be producing as much as we use. But what people neglect to take into account on there is that the little point that really changed all that, and that's what the red arrow shows, that's when we hit $100 a barrel oil. So clearly at $100 a barrel oil, we use less because it's starting to get expensive, and that allows us with those additional funds to pull oil out that we couldn't pull out before. But there are some significant consequences from that. So first of all, new oil has a much lower energy return on investment, all right? The EROI of Saudi Arabia or West Texas oil is about 100 to 1. That means for every 1 barrel of energy you use, you'll get 100 barrels of oil out of the ground. The Alberta tar sands are less than 4 to 1. They're something around 3.5 to 1. And why is that significant? The Alberta tar sands are the #1 source of imported oil into the United States today, about 1.8 million barrels per day. And that would be on its way to 6 million barrels per day. Okay? That happens to be a picture of a tailing pond up in Alberta. There are about 13,000 square kilometers of tailing ponds. So the way you turn tar sands into oil is you mine them in a giant bucket, fill it full of water and sodium hydroxide, and bake it. Right? And that breaks the oil down enough that you can transport it in a pipeline down to the refineries and crack it into gasoline. But what you end up with is water that has a fair amount of hydrocarbon in it. So those tailing sands alone put out about 100 million liters of methane per day. Right? The other thing, and this is one of the most amazing pictures I have seen in a long time. Right? So people have also heard that fracking is going to give us this energy independence. So fracking is not new technology. It's about 50 years old. The new technology is $100 a barrel oil, right? And at $100 a barrel, you can afford to pay $85 a barrel to get it out of the ground. But what this is a picture of, on the right, is a picture showing all of the new gas in red and the oil in green wells that have been dug on the west side of North Dakota over the last 5 years. And the picture on the left is a night image, a visual night image of a flyover from a satellite. And what you see there is no one who lives in northwest North Dakota, right? That is brighter than Manhattan. What that is, those are all of the gas being flared off from the oil wells. So when you drill oil and pull it out of the ground, a certain amount of natural gas comes with it, and they simply flare it off, all right? So there are significant consequences to the environment of this new oil that we're getting, and this new energy independence that people have claimed we're going to achieve is going to come at an enormous cost of greenhouse gas production, an increased rate of greenhouse gas production. So that's why we think about biofuels. So what are biofuels? Biofuels are simply the biological conversion of sunlight energy into chemical energy. All right? So they take sunlight, sequester CO2, and turn that into food and into fuel, lipids or fats, and the fats are refined into fuels. Now, petroleum is simply ancient algae, and coal is simply ancient plants. So all of those things are already photosynthetic. They're photosynthetic products. They're simply fossilized photosynthetic products. This is already a big business in this country, right? Many of you will know that corn ethanol industry here, we produced, last year, I think I have a slide for that, we produced about 12 billion gallons of corn ethanol. What we do is we grow the corn, we harvest it, we take the starch out of that and ferment that into ethanol. You can also do the same thing with sugarcane. And as I'll show you just a little bit, and Tim Zenk will talk about later, you can also do this with algae. And algae, what you get out of it is oil rather than sugar, so you don't ferment that into ethanol. But as I said, ethanol is already a big business. You know, in this country, we produced last year 13.2 billion gallons of ethanol. That took about 40% of our corn crop, right? The average price of corn last year was a little bit over $6.50 a bushel. That's significant consequences for the world in terms of the cost of food. Brazil, which is the one in green and is a little harder to see, that's actually economically viable. They can produce ethanol down in Brazil at about $1.25 a gallon, and they would ship it to this country if they were allowed to, but they're not. So we have something called the Renewable Fuel Standards, in which we're expected to come up with renewable fuels, and this is a projection of that. So the corn ethanol is in purple, and what you can see starting now in 2012, that's supposed to diminish over the next 8 years. We're supposed to wean ourselves from that, and we're supposed to replace that with advanced biofuels and with cellulosic ethanol biofuels. So cellulosic ethanol is clearly an opportunity that we have for a low-carbon fuel. The process goes, you harvest biomass, some woody biomass. It could be grasses, it could be trees. You shred those up, and using enzymes, you break that cellulose down to the individual sugars, and then you ferment those sugars into ethanol. And there are demonstration plants that should come online in the next year, a 50 million gallon one. There are some significant challenges to that. The number one being that there's a reason we make houses and furniture out of wood, and that's because it doesn't like to spontaneously break down. So there are some enormous challenges there, but people are pushing on those, and I think we have some opportunity in the next few years to see how well they work. We also think about algae for this, and mainly because we can grow it on non-fresh water, non-potable water. We can grow it in salty water. And then also because it has a very high productivity. So the graph on the left simply measures the biomass put on from algae compared to some other things that we use, either switchgrass or sugarcane. And because it's more photosynthetically efficient, you can actually get much more productivity per acre. So if we are really going to convert, our transportation fuels to this, we have to think about how much land resources would that use. We can get about 5,000 gallons per acre per year. So the quick math on that says 5,000 gallons per acre per year times 60 million acres would give us our 300 billion gallons. 60 million acres seems like a big number. We turned 40% of our corn crop, which was about 38 million acres, into that 12 million gallons of ethanol. So we're already using about half that much to produce corn ethanol, okay? And so fuels from algae have been turned into gasoline and jet and flown all over the world and driven all around the country, and I will let Tim Zink at the end of this tell you a little bit about it. And now I will let the other speakers tell you a little more about some of the other opportunities and challenges that we face. And just say that for those of you who are interested in sort of the technical details, the scientific nerd meeting is next Friday and Saturday up on the main campus for people who are interested in all things plants. Thanks.